he left us prophecies. Visions of darkness and light, of battles between angels and demons, of a future where faith itself would be tested. He healed the sick. He read hearts. He carried the wounds of Christ. And yet, he called himself only a simple friar. To some, he was a mystery. To others, a living miracle. The man who made skeptics tremble and believers weep. In war, soldiers swore they saw him in the sky. Families claimed incurable diseases vanished after his prayers. Doctors examined him, but found no answers. And all the while, he spoke softly of heaven and of the coming storm. But behind the miracles, there were secrets, hidden letters, private visions, prophecies whispered only to a few. They spoke of trials for the church and of a light that would rise after the darkness. The story of Padre Pio begins in the small village of Pietrelcina, nestled among the olive groves and hills of southern Italy. It was here, on May 25, 1887, that Francesco Forgiani, the boy who would one day be known to the world as Padre Pio, was born into a family of simple farmers. His parents, Grazio and Maria, were devout Catholics. They owned little more than their land and their faith, but those two treasures were enough to shape the soul of their young son. From the start, Francesco seemed different. While other children played noisily in the streets, he was often found in prayer, kneeling in front of a small home altar or spending hours in church. Neighbors would later say that as a boy, he sometimes spoke of seeing visions of Jesus, of Mary, and of his guardian angel. To him, these moments felt natural, like part of everyday life. But for those around him, it was clear that something extraordinary was already stirring in his heart. Life in Pietrelcina was not easy. Poverty weighed heavily on the village. Children often worked the fields alongside their parents. Illness was common and medicine scarce. Francesco himself was often sickly, suffering from fevers and stomach pains that baffled doctors. Yet even in weakness, he carried a sense of calm. He once told his mother that he wanted to be a friar with a beard, pointing already toward the Capuchin Franciscan life that awaited him. At the age of 5, Francesco made a promise that marked the rest of his life. After receiving his first communion, he consecrated himself to God. He began to sleep on a stone floor as a form of penance, to fast, and to spend long hours in prayer. These were not the ordinary habits of a child. His parents, though worried, recognized that his soul was being drawn to something greater. By the time he was 15, Francesco felt the call of God so strongly that he asked to enter the Capuchin Franciscan friars. His family was overjoyed, but there was a challenge. He needed more education. In order to pursue religious life, he had to study Latin, a language far removed from the dialect spoken in his village. His father even emigrated to America for a time, working in the fields to send money home so that his son could study. In January 1903, Francesco entered the novitiate of the Capuchins in Morcone. There, he received the brown habit of the order and took the name Pio. From that moment, he was no longer Francesco Forgiani, but Brother Pio of Pietrelcina. His life in the friary was one of discipline and sacrifice. The Capuchins lived simply praying together, working, studying, and serving the poor. For Brother Pio, the rhythm of prayer was everything. He would spend long nights before the Blessed Sacrament, sometimes lost in such deep meditation that hours slipped by unnoticed. Yet even as he grew in holiness, his body remained frail. He was frequently sick, often so weak that his superiors considered sending him home. At times, he coughed blood. At other times, mysterious illnesses left him bedridden. But his spiritual life only grew stronger. He began experiencing mystical phenomena, strange noises in his room at night, visions of heavenly beings, and battles with what he described as the devil. In 1909, He was ordained a deacon, and on August 10, 1910, at the age of 23, he was ordained a priest. It was the fulfillment of his childhood dream to offer Mass, to hear confessions, and to serve as a shepherd of souls. But soon, his priesthood would take on dimensions that few could imagine. From the very start, Padre Pio's Masses were unlike any others. Those who attended said he celebrated with a depth of sorrow and love that was overwhelming. His face often showed visible suffering, as though he were reliving Christ's passion. People who came to his confessional discovered that he seemed to know their sins before they spoke them. For some, this was terrifying, for others, liberating. Even in these early years, it was clear that Padre Pio was not an ordinary priest. His calling was marked by mystery, suffering, and an intimacy with God that defied explanation. And soon, the world would learn that this frail young friar carried a gift and a burden unlike anything seen in centuries. For in just a few years, his body would be marked with the wounds of Christ himself. In the quiet town of San Giovanni Rotondo, nestled on the slopes of Mount Gargano, Padre Pio's life took a turn that would astonish the world. It was September of 1918. The First World War had just ended, leaving Europe scarred and grieving. Padre Pio, who had served briefly as a military chaplain before being discharged due to poor health, returned to his friary. He was only 31 years old, but the years of illness, suffering, and intense prayer had aged him far beyond his age. On the morning of September 20th, after celebrating Mass and spending hours in prayer, something happened that few could believe. As he knelt before a crucifix in the choir loft, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a vision. A mysterious figure appeared, carrying a lance of light. In an instant, beams struck Padre Pio's hands, feet, and side. When the vision faded, he realized he was bleeding. His hands, his feet, and his chest bore the very wounds of Christ, the stigmata. From that day forward, Padre Pio carried those wounds for 50 long years. News spread quickly through the friary, then to the town, and soon to the world. Doctors were called to examine him. Some tried to dismiss the wounds as hysteria or self-infliction, but others admitted they had no explanation. The wounds never became infected, never closed, and continued to bleed, yet they did not weaken him fatally. Instead, he bore them silently, covering his hands with mittens or gloves to avoid attention. For Padre Pio, the stigmata was not a badge of honor, but a cross to bear. He begged God to take away the visible wounds, fearing the attention they would bring. But the wounds remained, as if God intended the world to see in him a living image of Christ crucified. Pilgrims began flocking to San Giovanni Rotondo. Word of this priest with the wounds of Christ spread across Italy, drawing the curious, the devout, and even skeptics. They wanted to see him, to hear him, to touch him. Some hoped for healing. Others simply wanted proof that miracles still existed. The Church, cautious and skeptical, began investigating. Some officials feared the frenzy surrounding Padre Pio was unhealthy, even dangerous. Reports were written, doctors examined him, and at times restrictions were placed on his ministry. For years, he was forbidden to celebrate Mass publicly or to hear confessions. Letters were censored. The Vatican watched closely, unsure what to make of him. Yet the people kept coming. They camped outside the friary, sometimes for days, waiting for the chance to confess to him or attend his Mass. His confessional became legendary. People would line up for hours, even days, knowing that Padre Pio had a gift unlike any other priest. He could see into the soul. He knew sins that had been forgotten or hidden. He did not allow excuses or evasions. His words were sometimes sharp, even stern, but always with the aim of leading souls back to God. Those who experienced confession with Padre Pio often described it as life-changing. Many entered with fear and shame, but left with tears of joy, feeling as though they had truly touched the mercy of Christ. At the altar, his masses became the center of devotion. Witnesses said he seemed to relive the passion of Christ in real time. His face would grow pale, his eyes fill with tears, and sometimes he would appear lost in ecstasy, suspended between heaven and earth. Those present said it was as if Calvary itself had come alive before them. Not everyone believed. Some accused him of fraud, of manipulating people's faith, of creating hysteria. But those who came with open hearts often left transformed. Stories of healings multiplied: a blind child who regained sight, a soldier healed of wounds, a woman freed from paralysis. Each miracle brought more pilgrims, more crowds, more attention. Padre Pio, however, never sought fame. He disliked photographs, avoided interviews, and longed for quiet prayer. Yet he accepted his role as a witness to God's power. When people tried to honor him, he always pointed them back to Christ. "I am only a poor friar who prays," he would say. But behind the public miracles and the visible wounds, there was another reality, one that few saw. Padre Pio's life was marked by intense suffering, both physical and spiritual. The devil, he claimed, often attacked him, appearing as terrifying figures or tormenting him at night. His health was fragile, and the misunderstandings from within the church cut him deeply. Still, he endured it all in silence, offering his pain as a sacrifice for souls. The stigmata then was not just a physical phenomenon. It was a constant reminder that Padre Pio was called to share in the suffering of Christ. His life was not his own. It belonged to God, and through him, to the countless souls who found their way back to faith. By the 1920s and 30s, Padre Pio's name had spread beyond Italy. Pilgrims from across Europe came to San Giovanni Rotondo. During World War II, American soldiers stationed in Italy heard about him and sought his blessing. Some even claimed that when they tried to bomb the area, a mysterious friar appeared in the sky and turned their planes back, sparing the town. As the years passed, the friary grew into a center of pilgrimage. Devotion to Padre Pio spread across oceans, reaching Catholics in every corner of the world. His fame grew, but so did the mystery surrounding him. Who was this man who carried the wounds of Christ, who read souls, who healed the sick? Was he a saint, a mystic, a prophet? Or was he, as some feared, a fraud? The answer would only become clearer with time. But one thing was undeniable. Padre Pio had become a sign for the world, a reminder that God's presence still breaks into human history in ways we cannot explain. And while the world marveled at his miracles and his wounds, Padre Pio carried in his heart something even more extraordinary: visions and messages of what was to come. Prophecies that, if true, would reveal not only the trials awaiting humanity, but also the path of hope God was offering through them. When people speak of Padre Pio, the first thing they remember are his miracles. To some, they were proof of God's power alive in the modern world. To others, they were mysteries science could not explain. But to Padre Pio himself, they were never his own. He constantly reminded people, "It is not I who heal, it is God who works through me." Let us walk through the extraordinary gifts and miracles that marked his life, each of them drawing thousands to his confessional, his mass, and his humble friary. Many pilgrims testified that when they were near Padre Pio, or even when they prayed to him from afar, they smelled the fragrance of fresh flowers, most often roses. This perfume would appear suddenly in places where no flowers were present. Doctors, soldiers, mothers, and even skeptics reported this phenomenon. Some claimed they smelled it after writing to him, others after receiving absolution in confession, and still others during prayer when asking for his intercession. For the faithful, this odor of sanctity was a sign of God's presence. For Padre Pio, it was nothing unusual. When asked, he shrugged and said, "It is simply my presence." Perhaps Padre Pio's most remarkable gift was his ability to see directly into a person's soul. When penitents entered his confessional, they often found that he already knew their sins. If someone tried to hide or soften the truth, Padre Pio would stop them. "Tell the whole truth," he would say. On some occasions, he revealed sins the person had forgotten or refused absolution until the penitent confessed fully. This was not cruelty, but mercy, a push toward complete honesty with God. Thousands left his confessional in tears of repentance, transformed forever. Priests who studied his ministry estimate that he heard confessions for more than 10 hours a day, sometimes longer, for decades. It was said that in his lifetime, he reconciled hundreds of thousands of souls with God. His confessional became one of the greatest channels of grace in modern history. One of the strangest gifts attributed to Padre Pio was bilocation, the ability to appear in two places at once. Stories circulated of Padre Pio being seen outside the friary, while at the same time staying within his cell. Others said he appeared at the bedside of sick people hundreds of miles away. One bishop in southern Italy swore that Padre Pio visited him in the night to deliver a message, even though Pio had not left the friary. When asked about these stories, Padre Pio never boasted. He only said, "It is something I do not understand myself. It is God who permits it." Countless healings are attributed to Padre Pio's prayers. Some were instantaneous and dramatic. Others were gradual, but undeniable. A woman paralyzed for years suddenly walked again after confessing to him. A child born blind gained sight after his blessing. Cancer patients were cured, and soldiers wounded in battle found themselves healed. Doctors who examined these cases often admitted they had no natural explanation. For families desperate for hope, these healings became living proof that God was still among his people. Padre Pio himself never claimed credit. He insisted that miracles were the work of Christ and the Virgin Mary. He was only an instrument. Padre Pio often spoke of direct encounters with the devil. At night, strange noises were heard in his cell, banging, shouting, even the sound of blows. Brothers in the friary sometimes found him bruised and bloodied in the morning, claiming he had been attacked. He described these experiences as spiritual battles, fought not for himself, but for the souls he was helping in confession. The devil, he said, was furious at losing souls and sought to break him through torment. But Padre Pio never gave in to fear. He relied on prayer, especially the rosary, as his greatest weapon. "Bring me my weapon," he would say, pointing to the beads of the rosary. Although we will later explore Padre Pio's larger prophecies about the future of the world, even in daily life, he showed signs of prophetic knowledge. He would warn visitors about upcoming dangers, predict deaths, and encourage people to prepare for events no one else foresaw. In some cases, these warnings saved lives. One soldier recalled being told by Padre Pio not to board a certain ship. Days later, that ship was sunk during the war. Others were told they would become priests or religious long before they had decided their path. These personal prophecies built a reputation of trust. That Padre Pio's words carried more than human wisdom. Above all gifts, Padre Pio's greatest miracle was the way he celebrated the Holy Mass. Those who attended described it as unforgettable. He celebrated slowly, with deep reverence, often moved to tears. Witnesses said he appeared to be reliving Christ's crucifixion. At times, his face glowed with ecstasy. At other times, he seemed crushed by invisible suffering. The Mass often lasted 2 hours or more, yet no one grew restless. People felt that they were truly at Calvary, standing at the foot of the cross. One pilgrim said, "It was like watching the Passion of Christ unfold before our eyes. We forgot the time, we forgot ourselves. Only Christ mattered." For Padre Pio, the Mass was not just a ritual. It was the sacrifice of Christ renewed, and he offered himself completely within it. Though known for his miracles, Padre Pio also acted in very practical ways. In 1956, he founded a hospital in San Giovanni Rotondo called the House for the Relief of Suffering. It became one of the most advanced medical centers in southern Italy, combining science and faith to care for the sick. For Padre Pio, building the hospital was as much a miracle as healing the sick himself, because it ensured that care would continue long after he was gone. Taken together, these gifts, the perfume of roses, the reading of souls, bilocation, healings, prophecies, and mystical prayer, painted the picture of a man living on the boundary between heaven and earth. To skeptics, it was too much to believe. To the faithful, it was a sign that holiness still exists in our time. To Padre Pio, it was simply obedience. He never sought these gifts, but accepted them as crosses to bear for the good of others. Through them all, he constantly repeated, "Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer." Yet, as astonishing as these miracles were, they were not the most important part of Padre Pio's life. For hidden behind them, known only to a few, were the prophecies he carried, warnings of trials that would shake the world and the Church. The people who flocked to him came seeking miracles of healing and hope. But Padre Pio's heart carried a heavier burden, visions of what humanity might face if it turned away from God. Those secrets, those chilling prophecies, would remain hidden for years, whispered only in letters or shared with trusted souls. But eventually, they would surface, leaving us to wonder if they were meant not only for his time, but for ours as well. Behind the miracles, the fame, and the endless lines of pilgrims, Padre Pio's life was marked by suffering. To the outside world, he was a wonder worker. But in the silence of his cell, he was a man constantly battling darkness, physical, spiritual, and even within the Church itself. His health was always fragile. From childhood, he carried weakness in his body. As a friar, he often coughed blood, collapsed with fevers, or lay bedridden for days. Doctors could not explain the strange illnesses that came and went, leaving him pale and exhausted. Some believed they were simply natural sicknesses. Others thought they were linked to the mystical weight he bore. Whatever the cause, Padre Pio accepted them without complaint. He once said, "Suffering is the ladder that leads to heaven." For him, pain was not a curse, but a way to share in Christ's passion. But his greatest struggles were not only physical. Padre Pio described being attacked by the devil himself. At night, strange sounds echoed through his cell, footsteps, banging, even voices mocking him. Brothers in the friary sometimes found him bruised or beaten in the morning. He explained that demons tried to frighten him, to wear him down, to stop him from helping souls in confession. Instead of giving in, he clung to the rosary and the cross, calling them his true weapons. "The beads," he said, "are the weapon of our times." These battles were terrifying, yet they also showed how seriously the devil took his mission. If Padre Pio's confessions were freeing thousands from sin, then it was no wonder that hell raged against him. He became a living battlefield, his body and soul caught between heaven and hell. And then there were the wounds, the stigmata. For Padre Pio, they were not marks of glory, but of constant pain. His hands bled daily. The wounds throbbed as though freshly inflicted, year after year, for 5 decades. He covered them with gloves, not out of pride, but to hide them from attention. He often prayed that God would remove the visible wounds, but leave the suffering within. His request was not granted. Instead, he became a visible sign of the crucified Christ, reminding the world that redemption comes only through the cross. As if these battles were not enough, Padre Pio also endured suspicion and misunderstanding from the very church he loved. Reports of his fame and miracles reached Rome. Some officials feared exaggeration, or worse, deception. For years, strict restrictions were placed on him. At times he was forbidden from hearing confessions publicly. At other times he was silenced, unable to correspond freely. Rumors spread that he manipulated people's faith, that he sought fame, that he was perhaps even a fraud. For a man who had given everything to God, this was a deep wound. He obeyed, never defending himself harshly, never rebelling against his superiors. He carried the silence as another cross. If Christ himself was misunderstood, why should his servant expect less? But these years of trial became a hidden furnace, purifying his soul. While thousands continued to believe in him, Padre Pio's humility deepened. He never sought to prove himself. Instead, he offered his pain for the conversion of souls. He once told a penitent, "I suffer only when I do not suffer." To him, suffering was his vocation, the price he willingly paid so others could find peace. Even as the world saw him as a miracle worker, those closest to him knew the depth of his struggle. He battled spiritual dryness, moments of inner darkness, when God seemed far away. Like many mystics before him, he entered into the dark night of the soul, a place where faith is tested not by visions or consolations, but by silence. Yet even in that silence, Padre Pio held fast to prayer. His rosary rarely left his hands. It is said he prayed dozens of rosaries a day, sometimes more than 50, carrying the world's burdens bead by bead. His life became a paradox. To the crowds, he was a living saint who healed the sick, who bore the wounds of Christ. To himself, he was a poor friar constantly fighting weakness, temptation, and accusation. This paradox is what makes his story so human and so powerful. He was not spared from suffering, he was immersed in it. And yet, through it, he became a channel of grace. In time, the Church would soften its restrictions and recognize the authenticity of his mission. But even then, Padre Pio continued to suffer quietly, offering every moment for the salvation of souls. His cell remained a place of battle, his body remained a crucifix, and his heart remained fixed on God. It is in these sufferings, hidden behind the miracles, that we see the true measure of Padre Pio. His greatness did not come from the crowds who adored him or the wonders people claimed. It came from his endurance, his humility, and his willingness to be broken for the sake of others. And yet, even as he endured all this, there was another dimension to his life, one that still stirs fear and fascination today. Padre Pio was not only a mystic of suffering, he was also a prophet. He carried visions of the future that he revealed only in fragments, sometimes in letters, sometimes in whispers to trusted souls. These prophecies, some of them terrifying, spoke of wars, chastisements, and a darkness that would cover the earth. But they also spoke of mercy, of hope, and of the triumph of God. To understand these prophecies, we first had to walk through his life of miracles and pain. Only now are we ready to begin opening the door to the hidden secrets he carried. Secrets that may not have been meant only for his time, but for ours. As the years passed, the friary at San Giovanni Rotondo was transformed. What had once been a quiet mountain monastery became one of the most visited religious sites in the world. By the mid-20th century, pilgrims were arriving not just from neighboring villages or Italian cities, but from across Europe, the Americas, and eventually every continent. All came with the same hope: to encounter the mysterious friar with the wounds of Christ. Padre Pio himself never sought this attention. He lived simply in his cell, prayed constantly, and celebrated Mass with the same intensity day after day. But word of mouth carried his reputation farther than he could have imagined. Soldiers returning home told their families about him. Journalists, curious to expose either a fraud or a saint, published stories that drew even more crowds. Some came seeking miracles of healing. Others came only out of curiosity. Yet many left with lives changed, touched by something they could not explain. During World War II, his fame spread even wider. Stories circulated that Allied pilots who tried to bomb the region saw a mysterious friar in the sky who forced them to turn back. Whether these accounts were legend or reality, they gave Padre Pio a reputation as the protector of San Giovanni Rotondo. To a people living in fear and uncertainty, the idea that a humble friar could shield them from destruction was a sign of hope. In the years after the war, his influence only grew. Letters poured in by the thousands. Pilgrims filled the friary, often sleeping outdoors for the chance to attend his Mass or confession. Photographs of him circulated around the world, showing his intense gaze, his wounded hands hidden beneath mittens, his humble presence surrounded by the faithful. To many, he was living proof that holiness had not disappeared from the modern world. But Padre Pio's legacy was not only in mystical gifts and stories. He believed faith must be lived through concrete acts of charity. For this reason, in 1956, he opened the hospital known as the Casa Salvo della Sofferenza, the House for the Relief of Suffering. With the support of benefactors and doctors, it became one of the most advanced medical centers in southern Italy. Here, science and faith worked side by side, serving the poor and the sick. For Padre Pio, the hospital was a miracle just as great as any healing. It was a lasting gift of mercy, one that would continue long after he was gone. Despite his humility, Padre Pio's influence reached even to popes. Pope Pius XII spoke of him as a man sent by God. Pope John XXIII, while cautious, admitted his extraordinary popularity. And Pope Paul V praised him for drawing people to confession and to the Eucharist. Later, Pope John Paul II, who visited him as a young priest, would canonize him, declaring him a saint for the Universal Church. Yet even as his fame soared, Padre Pio never lost sight of his identity. "I am only a poor friar who prays," he insisted. He avoided honors, rejected titles, and wanted nothing more than to serve the souls who came to him. He lived and died in the small cell at San Giovanni Rotondo, never leaving his friary except for obedience or necessity. By the time of his death on September 23, 1968, the world already considered him a saint. Tens of thousands came to his funeral. His body, examined years later, was found remarkably preserved, drawing even more pilgrims. His tomb became a place of prayer where millions still visit each year. The legacy of Padre Pio is immense. He left behind not only countless miracles and testimonies, but also a spiritual message: prayer, sacrifice, and trust in God. His simple phrase, "Pray, hope, and don't worry," has become a motto for millions of Catholics worldwide. His image, with his eyes lifted in prayer and his wounded hands folded, continues to inspire devotion. But perhaps the most enduring part of his legacy is what remains hidden. Beyond the miracles and the fame, beyond the hospital and the pilgrimages, Padre Pio left behind words, prophecies, warnings, and visions that seem to speak not only to his own time but to ours. These are the most mysterious aspects of his life, and perhaps the most urgent. For if his stigmata revealed Christ's suffering, and his miracles revealed God's mercy, his prophecies reveal something else, a glimpse into the struggles and trials that still await humanity. And so, as we turn from his legacy of miracles and fame, we must now face the most haunting question of all. What did Padre Pio see? What future did he warn about? And why do his words echo with such urgency today? The life of Padre Pio was a storm of miracles, healings, and visible signs of God. Yet those who knew him best often whispered that behind the public wonders there were secret visions of the future, words of warning, and glimpses of events still to come. These prophecies, scattered through his letters and preserved by those who spoke with him, form one of the most mysterious parts of his story. Padre Pio himself rarely spoke openly about them. He preferred silence, obedience, and prayer. But in moments of trust, he revealed fragments that leave us shaken even today. They are not easy words. They speak of trials, wars, and even darkness falling upon the earth. Yet they also point to mercy, to God's triumph, and to the hope that always shines even in the darkest times. From early in his ministry, Padre Pio warned of great suffering that would sweep across the world. In letters written in the 1940s and 1950s, he spoke of punishments for humanity's sins. He foresaw wars that would tear nations apart, famines that would afflict the poor, and disasters that would strike suddenly. One of his most famous words is often quoted: "Man's iniquity will be punished. The earth will be cleansed by suffering, because too many have forgotten God." During the years of World War II, he urged people to pray constantly for peace. He warned soldiers and families that the war was only the beginning of trials that would continue unless humanity returned to God. Some believe that his prayers and sacrifices even played a hidden role in preventing greater catastrophes, as stories circulated that Allied pilots saw him in visions protecting his town from destruction. For Padre Pio, war was not simply a clash of nations. It was a symptom of a deeper spiritual illness, humanity's rebellion against God. He saw wars as consequences of sin, and he begged people to repent so that greater disasters could be avoided. Among the most mysterious prophecies attributed to Padre Pio is his warning of the 3 days of darkness. In a letter said to be written to his spiritual children, he described a terrifying event. A great chastisement will come. It will be something never before seen on earth. Darkness will cover the earth for 3 days and nights. The air will be poisoned, and anyone who ventures outside will perish. The faithful must remain in their homes, pray the rosary, and light blessed candles. During those days, only blessed candles will give light, and the devils will roam the earth. These words have echoed for decades, repeated by believers and skeptics alike. Were they authentic? Some argue they are later attributions. Others insist they are genuinely from Padre Pio. What is certain is that the prophecy of 3 days of darkness has been present in Catholic mysticism for centuries, mentioned by saints like Blessed Anna Maria Tegui and Marie Julie Jaheni. Padre Pio's association with this prophecy gave it new force, for here was a modern saint, known for truthfulness and obedience, warning of a cosmic event of judgment. Whether literal or symbolic, the prophecy paints a picture of humanity facing its own rebellion against God and being called back through purification. For those who believe it, it is a message not of despair, but of preparation. To remain faithful, to stay close to the sacraments, and to trust in God's mercy when fear seems overwhelming. Padre Pio also carried prophecies about the Church itself. He warned that difficult times would come, when confusion and division would shake even the faithful. Some of his words were stark. The smoke of Satan will enter the Church. Others were more veiled, but all carried the sense that the Church would undergo a great trial. He foresaw scandals, divisions among priests and bishops, and times when the truth would seem clouded. These words unsettled many, because they came not from a critic outside the Church, but from one of its most faithful sons. Padre Pio loved the Church with all his heart. He obeyed even when restrictions were placed upon him. And yet, He could not ignore what God revealed to him, that the body of Christ on earth would suffer greatly before it would be renewed. Looking back at the decades since his death, many believe his warnings have unfolded before our eyes. Yet even in speaking of crisis, Padre Pio pointed always to the cross. The Church, he said, would suffer as Christ suffered, but just as Christ rose again, so too would the Church be purified and restored. Padre Pio also spoke of visions of souls in danger. At times, he would weep, saying he had seen countless souls falling into hell because they refused to repent. He begged people not to delay confession, not to presume upon God's mercy while rejecting his law. But alongside these terrifying visions, he also described moments of mercy. He saw angels guiding souls to heaven. He promised that prayer, especially the rosary, could change destinies. He urged people never to despair, but to trust in the boundless compassion of God. One of his most repeated exhortations was simple: pray, hope, and don't worry. To many, it seemed almost contradictory. How could a man who spoke of wars, chastisements, and darkness also say not to worry? But this was the heart of Padre Pio. He did not deny suffering, he entered into it. He did not minimize the seriousness of sin, he bore it in his own wounds. Yet he also knew that beyond the storm, there is always Christ's victory. For us who live decades after his death, Padre Pio's prophecies remain both mysterious and urgent. They do not give precise timelines. They do not spell out exact events. Instead, they point to the ongoing struggle of humanity between sin and grace. They warn us that turning away from God has real consequences. And they remind us that, no matter how dark the world becomes, God's mercy is greater. In an age of global conflict, moral confusion, and spiritual emptiness, his words feel like they were written for us. He calls us not to panic, but to prepare, not by stockpiling fear, but by deepening faith, to stay close to confession, to pray the rosary, to remain faithful to the Church even in its trials. Padre Pio did not give these prophecies to frighten, but to awaken. His own life was proof that suffering can be transformed into love, that darkness can be overcome by light, and that even in times of chastisement, God does not abandon his children. When we look at the life of Padre Pio, the miracles, the wounds, the battles, and the prophecies, a pattern emerges. He was chosen not only to comfort souls with God's presence, but also to warn them of the consequences of forgetting him. His prophecies are not a book of doom, but a call to return to the essentials: faith, hope, love, and repentance. And perhaps that is the greatest prophecy of all. For while details may remain uncertain, the message is timeless. The world cannot survive without God. Families cannot thrive without prayer. Souls cannot find peace without the mercy of Christ. Padre Pio's prophecies still echo today, not as threats, but as invitations to wake up, to turn back, to believe. Padre Pio lived in a century unlike any other before it. The world of his youth was simple and rural, but as he grew, so did the pace of history. His life spanned 2 world wars, the rise and fall of empires, and a rapid advance of science and technology. In a time when faith was being challenged by skepticism, when many believed that miracles belonged only to the past, Padre Pio stood as a contradiction, a living sign that the supernatural was still at work. Doctors were among the first to be baffled by him. His stigmata, bleeding daily yet never becoming infected, was examined by physicians from Italy and beyond. Some called it psychosomatic, the result of a disturbed mind creating physical wounds. Others admitted that no natural explanation fit. The wounds were deep yet clean, bloody yet strangely preserved. A French physician, after examining him, confessed, "I cannot explain it, but I cannot deny it." Journalists, too, traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo, hoping to expose a fraud or at least capture a sensational story. Instead, many left shaken. They wrote of his gaze that pierced the heart, of confessions where he revealed hidden sins, of people collapsing in tears of repentance. One skeptic came mocking and left a believer, confessing that Padre Pio knew details of his life no one else could know. Soldiers carried their own testimonies. During the Second World War, countless men claimed that the friar had appeared to them in visions. Some told of planes that could not drop bombs on San Giovanni Rotondo because a mysterious figure blocked their way. Others said they saw him on battlefields, blessing and protecting them. These stories circulated among the troops and spread across continents, giving Padre Pio the reputation of a protector even in war. But it was not only doctors, journalists, and soldiers who encountered him. Ordinary men and women came by the thousands. Farmers, mothers, students, and laborers all walked the long roads to reach his friary. They brought their sicknesses, their doubts, their broken marriages, their wayward children. They came burdened with sins and left with forgiveness. They came carrying despair and left with hope. Among those who met him were future saints and leaders. A young Polish priest, Karol Wojtyla, who would later become Pope John Paul Roman II, visited Padre Pio in 1947. He asked him to pray for a friend who was suffering from cancer. Later, that friend was healed in what was described as miraculous. John Paul Roman II never forgot the encounter, and decades later, as Pope, he would canonize Padre Pio, raising him officially to the altar of the Church. Even popes who never met him personally spoke of his importance. Pope Pius Roman XII encouraged people to seek him out, calling him a man close to God. Pope Paul Roman VI, who led the Church through turbulent years, praised Padre Pio for drawing people back to confession and prayer. For them, he was not just a local friar, but a figure for the entire Church. For the modern world, Padre Pio became a paradox. At a time when rationalism, science, and progress seemed to push faith aside, here was a friar with wounds science could not explain, with gifts no laboratory could reproduce. He did not reject science after all. He built a modern hospital as one of his greatest works. But he reminded the world that beyond medicine, beyond reason, there is mystery. His fame grew so large that by the 1950s and 60s, San Giovanni Rotondo became a pilgrimage center rivaling Lourdes or Fatima. Buses arrived daily, sometimes dozens at a time. Crowds filled the church and the square outside. And yet, inside his cell, Padre Pio remained the same, a man of prayer, humility, and suffering. He did not seek crowds. He did not give speeches. He simply prayed, heard confessions, and offered Mass. That was enough to shake the world. In many ways, Padre Pio embodied the tension of the modern age. On one hand, the 20th century proclaimed progress, technology, and human achievement. On the other, it was scarred by wars, dictatorships, and deep spiritual emptiness. Padre Pio stood in the middle of this world as a witness that holiness was still possible, that God was still present, and that the human soul still mattered more than machines, politics, or power. For believers, he was a reminder that faith was alive. For skeptics, he was a challenge they could not ignore. For the Church, he was both a source of renewal and of controversy. But for Padre Pio himself, none of these titles mattered. He remained, in his own words, a poor friar who prays. His presence in the modern world was not an escape from history, but a confrontation with it. In the age of world wars, he became a symbol of peace. In the rise of materialism, he embodied simplicity. In the face of despair, he offered hope. And in a century that often doubted miracles, he lived as a miracle himself. For all the miracles, the visions, and the extraordinary signs, Padre Pio's greatest legacy may not be the stigmata or the healings. It may be his words short, simple teachings that cut straight to the heart. Unlike long theological treatises or complicated sermons, Padre Pio spoke with the plain language of a friar who spent his life in prayer. His words were easy enough for a child to understand, yet deep enough to guide saints. Perhaps his most famous saying is the one repeated by millions around the world. Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer. But Padre Pio's life gives us courage. He shows us that if we stay close to God, if we carry our crosses with love, if we keep praying, even when it is hard, then no darkness can overcome us. The world may tremble, but Christ has already won the victory. Padre Pio once said, "After my death, I will do more. My real mission will begin then." And perhaps that is the greatest prophecy of all. For though he left this world in 1968, his mission continues. Through his prayers, through his legacy, and through his example, he still leads souls to God. He still whispers to us across time, "Pray, hope, and don't worry."